Imagine this. You're sitting inside an M1 Abrams tank, 70 tons of steel, 120mm smoothbore gun, the most feared land weapon of the last half-century. But instead of pointing that barrel across a desert or battlefield, you lower it beneath the surface of a lake. One question: what happens when a tank shell meets water? First, the basics. A modern tank shell is a sabot round, a long dart of dense metal, usually depleted uranium or tungsten, fired at up to 1,600 meters per second. That's nearly 5 times the speed of sound. In air, the dart stays supersonic for kilometers, punching straight through armor. But water is 800 times denser than air. That means the instant the shell leaves the muzzle, it slams into resistance, like a car hitting a wall. Let's do some quick physics. The drag force on an object in fluid goes roughly with the square of its speed. So, the faster you go, the more brutal the slowdown. A sabot round entering water at Mach 5 would lose velocity almost instantly. In fact, experiments show that high-speed projectiles in water typically disintegrate within the first few meters. The shockwaves rip them apart, so instead of slicing through like a bullet in air, the round becomes a very expensive bubble maker. But here's the weird part. If you fire a slower, heavier round, say a tank's 120mm high-explosive shell, the results change. This shell leaves the gun at a more modest 900 meters per second and carries nearly 5 kilograms of explosive. When it enters water, drag still slows it rapidly, but the casing is thick enough to survive long enough to travel several meters. And then it detonates. The blast underwater is catastrophic. Water is incompressible. When an explosion goes off in air, the blast spreads quickly and thins out. In water, the energy has nowhere to go. That 5-kilogram charge produces a shockwave strong enough to rupture eardrums, collapse lungs, and kill divers hundreds of meters away. Navies use a similar principle for depth charges. Even a small tank shell underwater can create pressure spikes in the range of tens of thousands of psi near the blast. Fish unlucky enough to be nearby wouldn't just die, they'd be liquefied. So what about distance? How far could a tank shell actually travel through water before detonating or falling apart? The answer? Not far. Tests with rifle bullets show they can penetrate maybe 2 or 3 meters before stopping. Scaled up, a tank sabot dart might get 5 to 10 meters before shattering. A high-explosive shell might make it 15 to 20 meters before exploding. So if you were imagining sinking enemy submarines with Abrams tanks, forget it. The round wouldn't even reach the periscope. But here's the twist. Military engineers have experimented with special rounds called supercavitating projectiles. These create a bubble of vapor around themselves as they move, reducing drag and letting them travel underwater at hundreds of meters per second. Russia, the US, and Germany have tested these for underwater guns and torpedoes. So, in theory, if you modified a tank shell with supercavitation tech, it could travel much farther and hit targets tens or hundreds of meters away. But your average Abrams shell? It's going to stop embarrassingly short. And what about the tank itself? Could you actually fire it underwater? Not really. The M1 Abrams gun uses propellant gases that need to vent freely. If the barrel is submerged, water rushes back in, creating dangerous pressure imbalances that could rupture the gun or destroy the breech. At best, you'd ruin the cannon. At worst, you'd turn the entire tank into an impromptu submarine coffin. So, what's the verdict? If you fired a tank shell underwater, the sabot dart would shred itself almost immediately. The explosive shell would detonate within a few meters, producing a devastating shockwave. Anything alive nearby would regret existing, but your tank gun might never fire again. In other words, tanks rule on land. Underwater, they're just very loud, very expensive fish tanks.